American pressure on Israel, not Israel, while visiting Israel, and unacceptable to Israel, to the land of Israel.
Welcome to Eyes on Israel, powered by Israel 365. As you are no doubt aware, over the past few weeks, there has been a surge of pro-Hamas, anti-Israel demonstrations on college campuses all across America. Much of the mainstream media has referred to these protests as pro-Palestinian and anti-war, but a closer look at the slogans and behavior of the protesters reveals something very dark going on. Calling for Tel Aviv to be leveled to the ground, or for IDF soldiers like my own children to be killed, and for the entire state of Israel to be wiped off the map are not exactly about peace and coexistence. Put simply, there has been a shocking surge in blatant Jew hatred on college campuses. At Yale, a Jewish student was stabbed in the eye with the stick of a Palestinian flag, sending him to the emergency room. And just a few days ago, a Jewish girl was surrounded by 5 pro-Hamas protesters at Dixon Plaza on the UCLA campus and beaten to the point of unconsciousness and had to be rushed to the hospital. Similar incidents of violent harassment have been reported on many campuses. On a number of these campuses, Jewish students have been harassed, prevented from going to class, and in some cases even warned by the school not to come to campus for their own safety. But the real scandal is in the fact that the college administrations in many cases are pandering to the Jew haters. A few weeks ago, there were hearings in Congress where Jewish students testified to the dangerous environment that they have now been subjected to. At those same hearings, on April 17th, Columbia University President Minouche Shafik was questioned about pro-Hamas comments made by Mohammed Abdu. Mohammed Abdu is a self-described, quote, Egyptian Muslim anarchist, interdisciplinary activist scholar of indigenous black critical race and Islamic studies. He's currently serving as a visiting professor of modern Arab studies at Columbia.
Let me bring your attention to Mohammed Abdu, who was hired after the October 7th terrorist attack against Israel. He, on October 11th, posted, yes, I'm with Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. He also decried false reports accusing Arabs and Muslims of decapitating the heads of children and being rapists. We know that there were decapitations of babies, of innocent Israeli citizens, of seniors, of women. There were rapes, and yet Columbia hired this individual as a professor. How did that hiring process work? Were you aware of those statements before the hiring?
I share with you your repugnance at those remarks. I completely understand that. On my watch, faculty who make remarks that cross the line in terms of anti-Semitism, there will be consequences for them.
What are the consequences in this case?
I have 5 cases at the moment who have either been either taken out of the classroom or dismissed.
And is he one of those?
He will never work at Columbia again.
So he has been terminated?
He has been terminated. And not just terminated, but his files will show that he will never work at Columbia again.
So he's currently not employed by Columbia?
He is grading his students' papers and will never teach at Columbia again.
Great! Columbia University's president is telling us that she has no tolerance for pro-terrorist rhetoric from her faculty, that Abdu was fired and will never work at Columbia again. There's only one problem. Shafik lied under oath. A week after this testimony, an investigative journalist who goes by the Twitter handle Visegrad24 went undercover into the protests at Columbia. He met up with Abdu, who told him plainly that President Shafik lied under oath. He was not fired. In Abdu's words, posted to Visegrad24's X account, quote, "It was a sham and a lie. I am not fired." And here's audio of a call made by a Jewish parent of a student at UCLA whose son was being prevented from attending classes by pro-Hamas protesters.
They said because he's Jewish, he cannot enter that area and that they won't issue him a wristband.
So that wasn't a university thing. That's probably the protesters that are out there.
Right. So are the protesters allowed to not allow a student who pays tuition access to their class in the library?
No, they're not allowed, but unfortunately they have kind of taken over that little area right there. But is there any other entrance that your son can enter through?
No, they are barricading every area for him to get into. And with all due respect, why is that even tolerated? Like, why should a Jewish kid have to go to another entrance?
It's not, I don't know if I'm going to say it's tolerated, but unfortunately the police are not intervening with that right now. And this is coming from the university, so if you had any questions or concern, you would take it with the university itself.
So the university has taken a stance that they will not, in fact, allow or help Jewish students get to their classes, that this is going to be tolerated.
We've received a directive to not intervene at this time, yes.
Sadly, the story is similar at campuses nationwide. Pro-Hamas, Jew-hating mobs have taken over public areas. Harassment of Jewish students is tolerated with a wink and a nudge from college administrations, and there appears to be no end in sight. Keep in mind that the students on these elite college campuses will be the leaders in government and education of the next generation. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu compared what we are seeing on American college campuses to what transpired on German campuses in the 1930s, and we all know how that ended. But unlike the 1930s, when almost no one spoke up for the Jews, today there are many, mostly Christians, who have been willing to stand up. Joining me now is Luke Moon, Executive Director of the Philos Project, a Christian organization dedicated to education about Israel. Luke recently led a mass counter-demonstration of support for Israel and the Jewish people at Columbia University. Luke Moon, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be with you.
So, Luke, what led you to put together this pro-Israel demonstration? Give us the story behind that, who else was involved, and how it turned out.
Well, it was quite amazing. We, on the Sunday before last week, I was asked, we got to organize Christians to come out in solidarity and support of what was happening on the campus of Columbia. And I was like, yeah, I could probably pull together 20, 30 people, no problem, whatever. And the guy I was talking to said, no, we need 500. I was like, man, 500 is a lot. I have a hard time getting, 50 people to turn out for something. But I think, I reached out to some other groups. Sean Foyt was one who's a big worship leader guy. Eric Metaxas, he has a good network through his talk radio show. And between the three of us and a few others, we were able to mobilize Christians in New York to turn up. And I was excited. I kept telling people, I think we're going to get 500. Rabbi Pesach, we had about 5,000 according to NYPD.
Wow.
There was a moment where I actually stepped into an alcove and actually wept because I was so blown away by the turnout. I couldn't believe it. I properly couldn't believe it.
So, Luke, we have about 3 minutes left. Tell us why you believe it's so important for Christians specifically to stand up right now and speak out.
Well, I think that Jews and Christians are linked in this struggle because what we're facing is civilizational. The people who are against the Jews are also against the Christians. We've seen that with Christmas tree, the attacks on Christmas tree lightings that took place around Christmas time, but it didn't stop, right? They continue to go after. Basically, what they're against is people who actually take the Bible seriously, which is Jews and Christians, right? Because we are the ones who stand in the way of their total global domination of, call it the red-green alliance between the Marxists and the Islamists. They both have global domination plans, and I think we stand in the way, and so they hate us. They hate what we stand for, And so the fact that they hate the Jews and hate the Christians, as far as I'm concerned, that means that the Jews and the Christians need to stand together because I would prefer standing rather than kneeling.
So many Americans, unfortunately, have not gotten with the program and don't realize that this war is really a war on Western civilization. But as I've said on this program before, the attacks on Christmas, the attacks on Easter that we saw a few weeks ago by pro-Hamas demonstrators really show us that our enemies understand. They define this war as a war on Western civilization. They really want to take down, exactly as you said, those who believe in the truth of the Bible. And that's what they share in common, even though we sometimes laugh at the fact that a lot of these woke progressives wouldn't make it very far in a Muslim nation. We can laugh at them, but they understand what they're doing.
Yeah, it is that coming together. If they see us together, we might as well stand together voluntarily, right? They really just, what they're against is the fact that Western civilization is rooted in the Judeo-Christian values. We know things like all men are created in the image of God from the Hebrew Bible, right? Like that gives us the elements. They love to talk about human rights, but yet they don't know where human rights comes from. Human rights come out of the Bible. And without that, they would have nothing. And they're returning to that, to their pagan roots very quickly. And we're seeing this on campus. And we as Christians and Jews, we need to stand up together and push back every chance we get. Tell
our audience where they could follow you on social media, and where they could follow the work of the Philos Project.
Yeah, Philos Project, PHILOS project.org is our website. Luke Moon 1, that's my X handle. And pretty easy to find there. Also, we're on all the socials.
All right. Thank you so much, Luke. Thank you on behalf of the Jewish people. God bless you. We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel just after this. Welcome back. In a few weeks, from May 20th to May 22nd, our good friends, the Israel Guys, in cooperation with the Keep God's Land Coalition and Israel 365, will be hosting the Israel Summit in Nashville, Tennessee, May 20th to 22nd, 2024. At this very moment, the United Nations, the European Union, and the Biden administration are coming against Israel's right to be sovereign in their own land. World bodies are attempting to force Israel to give up the biblical heartland, to pave the path for a two-state solution, a move which would be disastrous for the nation of Israel, as well as for the free world. This historic conference is the first annual gathering of pro-Israel Americans who unconditionally support Israel's right to be sovereign in the entirety of their land, including Gaza, Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. The time has come for Christian and Jewish supporters of Israel to rise up with one voice and say no to the two-state solution, yes to Israel's right to be sovereign in the entirety of the land of Israel. It's time we make a declaration that we will stand with God's land and people and the covenant that he gave to Abraham and his descendants forever, no conditions attached. Speakers at the Israel Summit will include Michelle Bachmann, Troy Miller, the president of the National Religious Broadcasters, member of Knesset Ohad Tal, esteemed journalist Caroline Glick, and many other leaders of the Israeli and pro-Israel community. So if you're in Nashville or the area, or you can get there, you don't want to miss this historic opportunity. With Israel under attack on the battlefield and the geopolitical arena, there has never been a more critical time to stand up and be counted. Visit theisraelguys.com/summit to find out more and to purchase your tickets to the Israel Summit today. As we witness the explosion of hatred for Jews and Israel spreading through elite college campuses across America, one aspect of these protests that has gone largely unnoticed is the involvement of anti-Israel Jews in the leadership of these demonstrations and tent camps. Yes, you heard correctly. As shocking as it may seem, there is a significant number of Jewish students who are demonstrating against Israel and in favor of Israel's genocidal enemies. The anti-Israel group Jewish Voice for Peace, who describe themselves as, quote, the largest progressive Jewish anti-Zionist organization in the world, is one of 3 organizations that set up the now famous tent camps, along with Students for Justice in Palestine and a group called Within Our Lifetime, whose website calls for the complete eradication of Israel, not a two-state solution. Jewish Voice for Peace and another Jewish pro-Hamas group called If Not Now signed a joint declaration with dozens of other extreme left anti-Israel groups calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. Notably, the statement made no mention at all of the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th, nor to the Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza. Apparently, Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now are fine with the rape, murder, and hostage-taking of their Jewish brothers and sisters. And just last week, during the festival of Passover, a group of progressive rabbis, calling themselves Rabbis for Ceasefire, traveled to Israel to stage a protest at the Erez border crossing between Israel and Gaza to protest Israel not allowing in enough humanitarian aid, a completely phony claim. If aid is not making it to Arabs in Gaza, it's only because Hamas commandeers all the aid and doesn't let the civilian population have any of it. To top it off, it has now been widely reported that George Soros, the leftist billionaire, is funding the tent camps and the protests on these college campuses. Soros, of course, is a Hungarian-born Jew. So you might be wondering why Jews would be rooting for Israel to be defeated by genocidal jihadist terrorists. The answer is, sadly, quite simple. These Jews have abandoned the Jewish faith. But wait, you'll say, there are rabbis among the protesters. I see Jews with kippot and prayer shawls. Don't let that fool you. The protesters, like the majority of Jews in the United States, identify with progressive left-wing values. They do not believe in the God of the Bible. They do not believe that the commandments and the values of the Torah are in any way binding on their lives. They do not long for the Messiah to come. They certainly do not pray for the rebuilding of the temple. More to the point of these protests, these Jews do not pray, as their ancestors always have, for the end of our exile and the rebuilding of the nation of Israel in our historic homeland. Let me put it this way. You know well that in this culture there are plenty of people who have abandoned their faith but still call themselves and their churches Christian while promoting woke progressive values that are antithetical to the Bible. As these self-hating Jews demonstrate, our Jewish community, sadly, is no different. The Talmud states that the Jewish people have three primary traits. We are merciful, easily ashamed, and kind. While all these are positive traits, even positive traits can be misused. If we're merciful to the wicked, we're easily shamed by the mainstream media, and we're kind to those who wish our own destruction, those same positive traits can become evil themselves. You see, these Jews that are protesting against Israel are not bad people. Just ask them. They'll be the first ones to tell you how righteous they are. Joining me now is Rabbi Yaakov Menken, founding and current managing director of the Coalition for Jewish Values, representing over 2,500 traditional Orthodox rabbis in American public policy and culture. Rabbi Menken, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Rabbi Menken, we have these rabbis, these coming to Erez Crossing. We have these Jewish groups. We have Jewish students who, in the name of Jewish values, in the name of Tikkun Olam, fixing the world, are supporting Israel's enemies. And at the Coalition for Jewish Values, you have been waging war against this corruption of Jewish values for a long time. What do you make of what we're seeing on these campuses?
Sadly, it's not a huge surprise. If you do not believe in the God of the Bible, and you see that there are 100 times as many anti-Semites in the world as Jews, then if democracy is your ultimate value, well, the Jews must be doing something wrong. The Bible tells us the opposite, of course. But these so-called rabbis, the level of fakery of this is unbelievable, because you go back 200 years and a rabbi meant a rabbi, somebody who had traditional scholarship. The Reform movement in Judaism reinvented what it was to be a rabbi, and sadly, that is how you end up here. With what even Reform leaders have called the most Jewishly ignorant generation in history. The difference is that a Christian at a certain point, by not believing in Christianity, is no longer a Christian. But the Jews are a people. And even a criminal in the United States remains a U.S. citizen. Well, the same thing is true in the Jewish peoplehood, that a person remains a member of the Jewish people, even if he's George Soros doing everything he can to destroy the Jewish people in the name of the Jews. Sadly, that is what these organizations are about. It is a fakery. What they actually know about Judaism couldn't be written on the back of couldn't fill the back of a postcard, excuse me. We just went through the holiday of Passover. The Passover Seder, as I'm sure you know and many of your Jewish listeners know, it is not just about the Exodus from Egypt. It's about anti-Semitism. It's about the history of anti-Semitism. It has a very important line that says it's not only that one rose against us to destroy us, but in every generation they rise to destroy us, and God saves us from their hands. We see that going on right now around us, but they have to reinvent the Seder because they don't know what the real one is all about. It's very sad. But that's their Judaism, and we need to look upon them with that sadness, hope that they will come to their senses, that they will stop preaching Jewish genocide as a Jewish value, and then restore what everybody who believes in the Bible knows to be true.
Well, Rabbi Menken, thank you so much for that clarity. We only have about 2 minutes left. Could you just share with everyone, with this audience, what the Coalition for Jewish Values is doing? It's a very important organization, and how people could follow you and follow the work, the important work of the coalition.
Well, we came into existence because of this problem. Although, to be completely honest, in 2017, the problem wasn't real anti-Semitism. The problem was fake accusations against people like Sebastian Gorka, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump himself. Anti-Semitism. This was the most pro-Israel, pro-Jewish community administration in certainly in Israel's history. And what we saw was just shameful. So we came into existence to kind of set the record straight across the board. Judaism is the original pro-life. We are the only national Jewish organization fighting to keep men out of women's sports and women's private spaces. It's unbelievable what needs to be done to simply rectify the understanding in America of what traditional values are. And of course, based on this, the Jewish left has been manipulating public opinion, making people think that what America refers to as Judeo-Christian ethics is somehow an argument between Jews and Christians. That's not true. These are the traditional founding values of America, and that's why there needs to be a Jewish voice saying, oh no, values are values across the board. And of course, we take the lead on an issue like anti-Semitism because nobody knows it. Like genuine rabbis.
All right, and how can people follow you? How can they follow the work of the Coalition for Jewish Values?
So just looking up Coalition for Jewish Values will bring you to the right place. We are cjvalues.org, CJ Values on your favorite social media. I am Y Menken, Y-M-E-N-K-E-N. I look forward to communicating to any of your viewers to see how we can spread the word further that, oh no, traditional values need their rightful place in American society.
Amen. And may we see the repentance and redemption of these misguided Jews speedily in our days. Rabbi Yaakov Menken, thank you so much for joining us on Eyes on Israel. We'll be right back in a few moments. Welcome back. It's been widely reported in Israeli media over the past few weeks that the International Criminal Court, or ICC, based in The Hague, is soon going to issue arrest warrants for alleged war crimes for a number of top Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. Although Israel, like the United States, is not a signatory to the ICC, such warrants would mean that those indicted would be at risk of being arrested were they to enter any of the 124 countries that are. Although the investigation that led to this point began in 2021, covering a period beginning in 2014, ICC prosecutor Karim Assad Ahmad Khan has said that the investigation will also look at the events since October 7th. As part of their rigorous investigation, the ICC interviewed staffers at the Al-Shifa and Nasser hospitals in Gaza. You might remember them. As we've documented on this show, those hospitals were built as central command centers of Hamas. I'm sure they'll get a fair and unbiased report from these hospital workers. Prime Minister Netanyahu, for his part, has slammed the ICC investigation for the sham that it is, making it clear that no decision by the ICC will deter Israel from its goal of defeating Hamas. In Netanyahu's words, quote, "I want to make one thing clear. No decision, neither in The Hague nor anywhere else, will harm our determination to achieve all the goals of the war. The release of all our hostages, a complete victory over Hamas, and a promise that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel," end quote. So where's the U.S. in all this? While White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre has stated that the U.S. does not support the ICC investigation, leading Israeli journalist Amit Segal recently reported that ICC officials in The Hague have privately said that they were in contact with the Biden administration and would never have proceeded without a green light from them, considering the sensitivity of the current situation and negotiations between Israel and Hamas. If Segal's reporting is correct, and he is one of the most respected journalists in Israel, we are witnessing yet another example of the Biden administration messaging support for Israel while undermining the Jewish state behind the scenes. To help us understand the implications of what we are seeing, joining us now is Eugene Kontorovich, professor of law at Scalia Law School at George Mason University and executive director of the Center for the Middle East and International Law at the school. He is also a leading scholar at the Kohelet Policy Forum. Eugene Kontorovich, Professor Kontorovich, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, this ICC, this International Criminal Court, it sounds pretty scary. You know, here's a court and they're going to issue warrants, or maybe they will, maybe they won't. What exactly is the ICC and what is the fear of this? What are the implications for Israel?
The ICC is not that international, and it's not much of a criminal court. It's an international organization like the UN, except very occasionally, it has trials and puts people in jail. But crucially, it does very little of that because the International Criminal Court only has jurisdiction over countries that agree to be part of its system. And the United States has not agreed. Israel has not agreed. Indeed, most countries in the world that are likely to find themselves at war have not agreed. Most of the people in the world live in countries that have not accepted the ICC. Nonetheless, the ICC is still, despite Israel not being a member, like America, going after Israeli officials. It has invented jurisdiction for itself by saying that Palestine, which is not even a state, has agreed to join the treaty. So basically, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the PLO and the Palestinian Authority, is getting a Hague-based international bureaucracy to go after his enemies, the Israelis. When you have terror groups like the PLO, and just this week, Lebanon, which is run by Hezbollah, joining the ICC, you can tell that the ICC is not about justice, but is rather a weapon for autocratic states to use in their conflicts against Western democracies. And just to tell you, the ICC has only convicted 6 people of serious crimes in its 23-year history. It's basically like the UN with courtrooms and prison cells, so we should not be surprised that, like the UN, it finds itself taking unprecedented steps against the world's only Jewish state.
So if the ICC is really, the way you're talking about it, it's really just an international organization. It's not really a court with jurisdiction over Israel. So what is the real fear? Why are we fighting this so hard? What are the possible dangers, either geopolitically or real dangers to the people who are under investigation?
There's two dangers. The principal danger is diplomatic, right? It feeds a narrative, right? Most people don't know that the ICC is let's say, a not serious organization, that the ICC is not some august court known for fairly, administering justice around the world. The newspaper headlines are going to say, Israeli prime minister hit with war crimes charges. And it's about that delegitimization. And like any blood libel, right, which are the historic demonizing claims against Jews, the point of the blood libel, saying that Jews kill babies, is not necessarily convicting anyone, but signaling to the world that it's open season for the Jews. And this is that kind of diplomatic signal. Also, it means that if the relevant Israeli leaders travel to any of the countries, mostly, let's say, European countries, that have joined the court, they could be arrested. So I would say it's not a catastrophic setback for Israel, but it is a clear attempt to tilt the scales against Israel and in favor of Hamas. The Hamas leaders are not afraid of being arrested by the ICC because no one has ever been, no dictator or authoritarian leader that has been in power has ever been arrested by the ICC. So it also, would make Israeli officials worried, right? So, Israeli officers, like American servicemen, they're in it to serve their country. They're not like taking home big paychecks. And they might think, what's the point of doing this if I can't travel to Europe afterwards? And that kind of chilling effect could impair Israel's security. And of course, America is in the same position. America also has not joined the ICC because it considers it to be a biased tribunal. If the ICC can go after Israelis, right, even though Israel has not joined the court, it's quite clear that they will be able to go after American soldiers abroad. And indeed, they have an investigation of Afghanistan that includes crimes that could be committed by, allegedly committed by American servicemen. As always, right, Israel is the canary in the coal mine, right? What they say is, the little Satan, as the Iranian Axis of Resistance calls it, is there to set precedents that could be used against America.
This is another example of they're coming for America, but Israel is in the way. So when we think about the jurisdictional issue, you mentioned before that the Palestinian Authority, the PLO under Mahmoud Abbas, which is purportedly, according to the Biden administration, the potential leaders of a Palestinian state and our peace partners, they're the ones who are behind this. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, Hamas has welcomed ICC jurisdiction. When you see Hamas and the PLO celebrating the judicial process of some body, I think that's a very good sign that they have no expectation that that is going to be a fair or serious judicial process.
Yeah, it's also further confirmation that the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas is no partner for peace. They obviously seek Israel's demonization and destruction.
They're working hand in hand with Hamas on the ICC matter.
Professor Kantorovich, I understand that you just published a piece in the Wall Street Journal on this topic. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about that and also where they could follow your work or follow you on social media if you have that?
Sure. So in my Wall Street Journal article, I explained why the ICC is doing this. The ICC, like many international institutions, like the UN itself, was created with a beautiful, broad idea. We're going to, instead of, countries fighting each other, instead of people being able to commit war crimes and get away with it, we're going to have these people in The Hague who will deal with it in a cosmopolitan, technocratic, dispassionate way. But of course, you can't have law without power. And the ICC has no police, they have no enforcement mechanism. So they have been unable to do anything to prevent war crimes. They've indicted some bad people. They've indicted Bashir, the genocidal dictator of Sudan, Gaddafi, Putin, and all of those have basically laughed at their warrants, and they have accomplished nothing. They spend $183 million a year. So now even sort of people who like the idea of the ICC have said, what have you got to show for it? So having failed to achieve international justice, they are now falling back on the most reliable trick of a failed institution or a failed government, which is appealing to the lowest common denominator, the hatred of Jews. And they know that for many countries, if the ICC only does one thing, and that one thing is prosecute Israel for its self-defense, it will have vindicated its $200 million a year budget forever. So that's kind of the point of the article. So I teach at George Mason University, Scalia Law School in Arlington, a wonderful place that has been free of much of the madness plaguing American academia. And I work at an Israeli think tank, the Kohelet Policy Forum, which is Israel's perhaps most important think tank on the right. And you can follow me on Twitter, which is where I mostly discuss these things, at E.V. Kantorovich.
Thank you very much for joining Eyes on Israel. Professor Kantorovich, would love to have you back. Thank you for your clarity on the subject.
Take care.
We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel right after this.
But what is the word in Hebrew for a settler? It's a mitnachel. And the word mitnachel comes from the Hebrew word of nachala, which means a heritage. Now, how is a heritage different than an inheritance? And an inheritance is something you could give away. You inherit money, you could give it away if you want. A heritage is part of who you are. God did not give the land of Israel to the Jewish people. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God, and He entrusts it to the nation of Israel. And by you standing with Israel to keep Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem as Israel, you are not only supporting Israel, but you're supporting God. So I urge you to please consider, keep God's land. On October 7th, the world was exposed to the most demonic, sick, twisted evil. Front and center, GoPro cameras, they experienced and they saw this evil. And you would think, you project your own values and you think, well, the whole world's going to turn against those people. But no, within the coming months, marches through London, through Paris, through Australia, in the streets, free Palestine, siding with Hamas and siding with that evil. What do I think is going to happen? How is this all going to play out? I think that right now Israel is fighting with Gaza. Soon something is going to happen in the north to inflame the northern border in Hezbollah. Already China and Russia and Syria, Iran, the head of the whole snake, they're all saying that they're going to attack Israel. And the period between now and then, because when that happens, Israel is going to stand alone. The world is going to turn against Israel. America will have warships off the coast of Lebanon. And ultimately, I believe they're not going to get involved and they're going to stand down. And Israel is going to be all alone. And we will see that according to the laws of nature, the laws of man, we have no chance to survive. And we're going to have to turn our hearts to Hashem, to the creator of heaven and earth who has been with us since the very beginning. And we're going to say, Hashem, please, we have no one else but you. Please help us, help us. And He will, in the most miraculous, magnificent way the human mind can even imagine. So the times between October 7th and that great day that's coming, these are times of refinement. These are times where the nations of the world and every individual in the world has the opportunity to say, where do I stand? Who am I with? Am I with Hamas and the 23 Arab states and the 55 Muslim states and the people with the ferocity and the weapons and the anger and the hate? Because they seem pretty powerful, and it seems safer to side with the powerful, enraged, insane, pathological terrorists than with this small Jewish state of Israel. But if you want to side with God and with truth and with goodness and with light in the world, you side with Israel. So these are days of refinement. And my urge to the world, my blessing to the nations of the world and to the people of the world, is that you stand with Israel, not for our sake, because God is with us and He will be with us no matter what, for your own sake. For your own sake, you should stand with Israel, because these times of refinement are what the gold is refined from the dross, and you get to decide who you stand with. Do you stand with the God of Israel, or do you stand against the God of Israel? And it's really that simple. So I bless you with only goodness and happiness and health, and to stand with Israel and the Jewish people.
What's happening in Israel and what's happening to the people of Israel inside this land is this war, this encounter with evil has forced us to ask the ultimate questions about life. And so often people are distracted, they're entertained, they're watching the ball game, and the ultimate questions forget to be asked, and we don't teach our children to ask these ultimate questions. And then religion seems almost irrelevant. Okay, they have their rituals and we have our menorah that we light these candles, and what is that all really all about? But this war is forcing us to ask, what are we really living for? What are we ready to die for? What is evil and what is good? And how do I align myself in this world? And so now a line is being drawn in the sand. We saw evil manifest in the world in a way that we haven't seen, at least in my lifetime. And so now every person has an opportunity to side with child kidnappers, rapists, murderers, or to side with the Jewish people in the land of Israel that are seeking to settle God's land that he promised to them. And so there are forces in the world that are stopping that process from happening, the Jewish people inheriting the promise that God gave us to inherit this land. And so standing with Israel is to stand with that promise. It's to stand with the good. And the difference between good and God, it's so close. And so without encountering that evil, we forget about the good. And so this is an awakening that's happening now around the world, forcing us to really ask the ultimate questions that the Bible is here to answer. And so I think that what's happening now is a spark that is to light up a lot of people's lives with a real encounter with the truth. If you look at the Bible, or you look at all of history, when evil arises in the world, it immediately attacks the Jewish people. In the 1940s, the Nazis began gaining power. Then they began systematically annihilating the Jewish people. It eventually reached Pearl Harbor. It's just a matter of time. When evil rises, it wants to dominate. So too right now, this radical Islam that has come out against the Jews, it's attacking us in Israel first, but it's just a matter of time until it reaches London and Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. And so the Jewish people are called to be a light unto the nations. And what does that mean? Either we will bring the light of the Torah to the world, or our sheer existence will expose the darkness. And that darkness is attracted to us to wake up the rest of the world, to let them know that if your eyes are not on Jerusalem, you're missing the move of God. The redemption, God's plan, is to unfold in this land. And so keeping your eyes on Israel is the wake-up call.
I want to take you back to the binding of Isaac's story. The binding of Isaac, as we know, God tells Abraham, take your son, your only son, and bring him up on a mountain as an offering to me. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Now here's an interesting rule. Anytime it says at the beginning of a story in the Bible, after these things, in Hebrew, achar hadvarim ha'ele, after these things, the next thing happened, it means that there must be a relationship between this story and the story before it. Most stories in the Bible don't have an introductory line that says, after that happened, this happened. You just get the next story. This story ended and the next story begins. But every now and then in the Bible, there's a story that begins by saying, after that happened, this happened. The importance of that is that means that the story you're about to read is related directly to the story that came before it. That's why the Bible's saying, after that, this. So what's the story right before the story of the binding of Isaac? The next story we have in the Bible is Abraham going to Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, and they make a peace treaty. First, Abraham points out to Avimelech that some of his wells were stolen. Avimelech says, I don't know what you're talking about. I got nothing to do with that. Abraham drops the complaint. Abraham then gives a gift to Avimelech. We don't see Avimelech giving a gift to Abraham. And then they sign a treaty that they will not infringe on each other's property. Great rabbi in the 12th century, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir. And he was a commentator that just liked to read, what do the words say? And he latches on to the fact that it says, after these things. And he explains as follows. He says, why was God testing Abraham now, right after the treaty with Avimelech? He says, the answer is that God was rebuking Abraham, because God never told Abraham to make a treaty with Avimelech, king of the Philistines. God never told Abraham to give up a portion of the land that was promised to him. and agree to someone else's sovereignty over it. And let's also remember that the Philistines are not originally from that area. They were a seafaring people that came from the Greek islands. And they had occupied, do you know what part of Israel is Philistine territory? Anyone know? It's called the Gaza Strip, and a little bit more. It extends a little further inland than the Gaza Strip, but the Gaza Strip is entirely in Philistine territory. So this is literally a story about the Gaza Strip, okay? So Abraham goes over there to meet with Avimelech, and he signs this treaty, and God's upset at him. And God says to him, this is the words now of this rabbi in the 12th century. He said, God said to Abraham, by testing him, he said, wait a second, you decided that you're going to give up a portion of the land that I promised you to secure the safety of your children and grandchildren? Let's see how good that treaty is if you have to kill your son Isaac before he even has kids. It's pretty harsh, huh? Now, that's a very powerful teaching. I want to add something to it. Because when I read that teaching many, many years ago, I read the whole binding of Isaac's story more carefully, and I noticed something very powerful. At the end of the binding of Isaac's story, God stops Abraham from killing Isaac, and then he gives him a blessing. Let's look at the blessing Abraham gets. I will surely bless you. This is, again, the angel has just stopped Abraham from killing Isaac, and because Abraham obeyed God in being willing to sacrifice his son, he gets this blessing. Now look carefully at this blessing. I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all the nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. There are three components. Let's sum this up. There are three parts to this blessing. Number one, your children will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. We've heard that before. God has told Abraham that blessing a couple of times before Genesis 22. The third part of the blessing, through your offspring, all the nations on the earth will be blessed. We've heard that before too, all the way back in Genesis 12, right? All the nations will be blessed through you. The only new blessing from God, as a result of Abraham being willing to sacrifice his only son Isaac, the only brand new blessing is that middle component. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. In other words, you will be victorious in warfare over your enemies. And folks, I say this now as someone, as I said before, who has 3 children and a son-in-law in combat units right now. God was telling Abraham that the way that you secure the future of your children and grandchildren in this land is not by giving up pieces of it to your enemies. By being willing to put up your kids' lives, only that way can you be victorious in war. I don't want your kids to die, that's why I'm not going to take them. But your enemies are sure willing to give their lives to win. What are all those suicide bombings that we've been experiencing for decades been about? You know what that's about? As much as it's insane and demonic, let's admire them for a moment. These are dedicated people. They're willing to give up their own lives so that we will die. Do we have that level of dedication? So God was saying to Abraham, the only way you can guarantee that you can win wars is if you are willing to sacrifice. That's a heavy lesson. Let's take that in.